Chapter 1. The Number That Refused to Die. The first time the number was noticed, it was already too late. It lay in the margin of a burned ledger, thin and crooked, as if it had crawled there on its own while the rest of the page screamed itself into ash. The parchment had survived a fire that took an entire monastery with it. Beams collapsed, bells melted, bones fused to stone. Yet this single mark remained dark and patient, neither smudged nor warped by heat. Those who found it would later insist it felt cool beneath the fingertip, like something that had never belonged to flame at all. The ledger itself was a relic of bookkeeping. Grain tallies, tithe counts, burial fees written in a monk's careful hand. Mundane things, safe things. But the number in the margin belonged to none of them. It did not sum. It did not subtract. It stood apart, slightly tilted, repeating on every surviving page as though copied by a second, unseen scribe who had ignored the rules of accounting and time alike. Brother Aldrich was the first to cross it out. He did so with trembling resolve, drawing a firm line through the figure and whispering a prayer meant for vermin and blight. The prayer failed. When he turned the page and turned it back again, the line was gone. The number remained, unchanged, ink dark and whole, watching him from the paper's edge. Aldrich did not sleep that night. He claimed the number followed him into the dark, appearing behind his eyelids whenever he blinked. He said it pulsed faintly, not with light, but with attention. By dawn, he had torn the ledger apart page by page, feeding it to the hearth. The fire accepted everything willingly, except the ash where the number had been. That ash would not scatter. It clung together in the shape of the figure until Aldrich crushed it beneath his heel. By the end of the week, he had forgotten his own name. Word traveled slowly in those days, carried by hose and breath and rumor. Yet the number spread faster than any story. Scholars came first, drawn by curiosity sharpened into hunger. They catalogued it, measured it, compared its proportions against known numerals and foreign scripts. One claimed it resembled a Phoenician mark for loss. Another swore it echoed a forgotten Roman shorthand for debt. Each wrote their theories carefully, only to find the number had appeared beside their notes, copied perfectly in their own handwriting. "It isn't written," murmured Master Havelock, a man whose beard was longer than his patience. "It's remembered." They tried scraping it away. The parchment tore before the number faded. They tried salt vinegar, holy water hauled from a shrine 2 valleys away. The liquid soaked the page, warped the ink around it. Yet the figure stood dry and intact, as if the world had politely stepped aside. Priests arrived next, sleeves heavy with relics, mouths full of borrowed authority. They circled the ledger, chanting until their voices grew hoarse and the air thickened with incense. One pressed a consecrated seal directly atop the number and spoke a name of God not meant for daylight. The seal cracked. A younger priest, barely more than a boy, began to cry. "I can hear it," he whispered, clutching his ears. "It's counting." No one asked what it counted toward. The ledger was sealed inside an iron coffer and buried beneath the monastery's ruins, marked with warnings that grew more desperate with each translation. Do not open. Do not copy. Do not acknowledge. But warnings, like numbers, have a way of inviting repetition. Years later, when the coffer was unearthed during the laying of a road, the iron was rusted through. The lock burst outward as if something inside had pushed. The ledger lay open. The number had multiplied. It appeared not only in the margins now, but between words, between sums, tucked into the negative space where nothing was meant to be. It was smaller in some places, larger in others, as though adjusting itself to fit the reader's eye. Those who looked too long reported a sensation behind the sternum, a gentle pressure, like a finger testing for a pulse. At night, villagers began to dream of counting. Steps, heartbeats, sheep with hollow eyes. Always the same number, arriving just before waking, perched on the edge of memory like a crow on a gravestone. "Don't say it aloud," warned old Marta, who had outlived 2 husbands and a plague. "Names wake things. Numbers invite them." Yet the number wanted to be spoken. That much became clear when a scholar, Dr. Weiss, proud and exhausted, finally gave in. He stood over the ledger at dawn, hands shaking, and whispered the figure as one might whisper a confession. The sound was wrong. It landed too heavily in the room, as if the walls themselves had been waiting for it. The candles guttered. Somewhere beneath the floor, what creaked in a pattern that echoed the number's shape. Dr. Weiss smiled. "I understand it now," he said softly. "It isn't a value. It's a remainder." They found him hours later, seated peacefully at his desk. Every book he owned open to the same page, the same margin, the same number. His eyes had been carefully scratched out, as though sight were no longer required. After that, the ledger was no longer moved. People avoided the room entirely, stepping around its door as if it were a fresh grave. But avoidance did not mean escape. The number began to surface elsewhere, carved into pews, etched into window frost, traced in spilled grain on barn floors. Always the same, always precise. Children drew it without knowing why. Animals refused to cross it, and those who noticed it too often began to feel counted, as if some slow, patient sum were being worked out behind their ribs, one breath at a time. On the final night before the chapter closes, a novice monk, new, unafraid, foolish, opened the ledger and turned to the first page. The number waited for him there, as it always had. But this time, beneath it, a second mark had appeared, a faint stroke, the beginning of another number. And somewhere in the dark, something shifted, as if pleased to continue. Chapter 2. The equation found beneath the gallows. The gallows had been standing longer than anyone remembered, and it had learned how to listen. It rose on a bald hill at the edge of the town, its beams blackened by rain and confession, its ropes replaced so often that the wood itself seemed to resent their absence. Crows nested in its crossbar. Grass refused to grow beneath it. Even on calm days, the structure creaked as though responding to a question no one else could hear. It was beneath those beams, pressed into the damp underside of the platform, that the equation waited. No one knew who first noticed it. Some said it was a hangman, kneeling to retrieve a drop tool. Others claimed a child crawling beneath the boards during a game of dare. Whoever it was spoke of the same sensation, a sudden stillness, as if the hill had inhaled and refused to exhale until it was seen. The carving was shallow but deliberate, lines scored with a steady hand, symbols half-formed, some missing entirely, yet the structure held, a balance so precise it hurt the eye to look at it. Even with pieces absent, the equation resolved itself, the way a melody does when a note is implied rather than played. "It's wrong," muttered Elias Crow, the town clerk, squinting beneath the platform with a lantern trembling in his grip. "There's nothing there. It shouldn't work." "But it does," whispered the blacksmith's widow. "I can feel it settling." They said the wood around the equation was older than the rest, as though it had grown around the carving, instead of being cut to receive it, or had eaten away the nearby grain. Yet the lines remained sharp, their edges dry and clean. When rain fell, water beat around the symbols and slid away, unwilling to cross. The gallows had seen many die, thieves, murderers, heretics, and once, a midwife accused of whispering to bones. Each execution followed the same ritual, the climb, the hood, the tightening of the rope, and always, at the moment the trapdoor fell, the same word tore itself from the condemned's throat. Not a prayer, not a curse, a number. The crowd never understood it. They heard only the sound, not the shape. But those who had learned their figures felt something twist inside them when it was spoken, a recognition without comprehension, like meeting a stranger who knows your name. "Say it again," the magistrate once demanded, leaning forward in his seat, morbidly curious. The condemned man laughed, a wet, broken sound, and shook his head. "It's already said," he rasped. "You're all standing inside it." After the carving was discovered, execution ceased. The rope hung unused, stiffening in the weather. People avoided the hill, taking longer paths that bent their days out of shape. Still, at night, the gallows worked. It groaned softly, its joints tightening and loosening in slow rhythm, as if solving and resolving something over and over. Scholars came, of course. They always did. They arrived with measuring tools and confident voices, lying to themselves about the limits of reason. They copied the equation carefully, leaving blanks where symbols were missing, certain they could infer what had been lost. They failed, no matter what they substituted. The equation resisted completion. Additions caused imbalance. Subtractions collapsed it entirely. Yet when they erased everything and left only what was carved beneath the gallows, The balance returned, silent, complete, satisfied. "It isn't missing anything," said Professor Halvern, rubbing chalk-stained fingers together. "It's refusing excess." A younger scholar frowned. "But what does it calculate?" Halvern did not answer immediately. He had begun to sweat, despite the cold. "It doesn't calculate," he said at last. "It accounts." That night, the professor dreamed of ropes unraveling into numbers, each fiber a digit, each not a remainder. He woke gasping, his mouth forming the same word the condemned had screamed, though he could not remember meaning to say it. The townsfolk gathered in whispers. They spoke of patterns, of how those executed closest to the discovery had lived lives that curved toward the gallows long before their crimes, of how accusations arose suddenly, like answers appearing without questions. "My husband never stole," said the miller's wife, staring at the hill. But the some said he would. They argued whether the equation predicted deaths or required them, whether the gallows enforced justice or merely fulfilled a calculation already in motion. No one dared test it by dismantling the structure. The last man to suggest it found the word carved into his door the next morning, neat and centered, as if written by a careful hand. One evening, as fog pooled thick around the hill, a voice drifted down from the platform. "Still unbalanced," it murmured. There was no one there. The voice returned the next night, and the next, always softer, always patient. People claimed it came from beneath the boards, from the space where the equation slept. Children covered their ears and cried. Dogs refused to bark. Finally, the town agreed to one last execution. A volunteer, a man named Thomas Reed, who had lost his family to accusations and arithmetic alike. He climbed the steps without resistance, eyes fixed not on the crowd, but on the shadow beneath the platform. "Is this what you want?" he called, his voice steady. "One more term." The rope tightened. The trapdoor fell. As Thomas dropped, he screamed a word. The hill exhaled. Beneath the gallows, the equation changed. A new line appeared, carved deep and fresh, though it was still pale around it. One of the missing symbols had been supplied, not by hand, but by outcome. The balance shifted, settled, and for the first time, the lanterns flickered out all at once. When they were relit, something else was there too. Another space, another absence, waiting to be filled. And in the quiet that followed, the gallows creaked, not with age, but with anticipation. Chapter 3. When Zero Learned to Whisper. Nothing should not have a voice, yet it was the quietest hours that taught them otherwise. The monastery of St. Icember lay folded into the mountains like a thought half-forgotten, its stones pale as old bones and just as patient. Snow gathered there even in summer, lingering in the cloisters where footsteps softened and time lost its edges. The monks believed this was a holy mercy, a place where the world's noise could not follow. They did not yet know that silence, when tended to carefully, learns how to speak back. It began during the night vigils. Brother Matthew was copying figures by candlelight, his breath steady, his hand practiced. The task was simple arithmetic. Subtraction meant to sharpen humility, taking away excess, returning to what mattered. The final column brought him again, and again to the same symbol. A circle, perfect, empty, zero. As his quill hovered, he hesitated, not from doubt, but from a sensation he could not name. The candle flame bent inward, as though listening. The circle on the page seemed deeper than ink, a small hollow pressed into the parchment. Then it whispered, not a sound, not truly, more suggestion, a brushing of meaning against the inside of his skull. Brother Matthew froze, heart stuttering, and in that stillness the whisper gathered shape. "Remove." He dropped the quill. Ink splattered like a startled insect. "Who's there?" he murmured, ashamed even as he spoke, for fear was a poor companion to faith. The whisper did not answer. It waited. By morning, Matthew could not remember the name of the man he had been before taking vows. This troubled him less than it should have. Names, after all, were worldly things. Others heard it soon after. They spoke of it only in confession, voices low, eyes fixed on the floor, a murmur in the margins, a breath between calculations. Always at the moment of subtraction, when something was taken away, and the mind lingered on the absence. "It tells me what I no longer need," said Brother Alan, fingers whirring his rosary until the beads cracked. "It says less is kinder," whispered another. "It knows where the excess hides," breathed a third, tears tracing the grooves of his cheeks. The abbot listened, his face a careful mask of calm. He ordered more prayer, more fasting, fewer numbers. The ledgers were locked away. Arithmetic was declared a temptation of pride. Yet even without ink and parchment, the whisper found them. It followed them into psalms, into breath counts, into the spaces between heartbeats. Zero, once a servant of meaning, had learned to hunger. Old manuscripts surfaced in the abbey's depths, pulled from dust like bones from shallow graves. Marginalia written by long-dead hands spoke of the circle with unease. Nulla vox, said audit. No voice, yet it hears. Another warned. What is subtracted from nothing is lost all. The monks began to forget small things first. A familiar hymn's final verse. The face of a brother sent to another cloister. The taste of bread. They laughed it off, gently, kindly. Forgetting was natural. Forgetting was rest. Then came the erasures. Brother Luke vanished one morning, his cell neat, his sandals by the door. No one remembered seeing him leave. By noon, no one remembered him at all, except a blank space in the seating of the refectory that made the abbot's chest ache without knowing why. Was there someone there? He asked softly. The whisper answered, pleased. There was too much. At night, candles went out one by one, though no wind touched them. The darkness felt measured, portioned carefully, as if doled out by an unseen hand. In that dark, the monks heard the circle speak more clearly. Subtract the name. It urged. Subtract the face. Subtract the memory. And the pain follows it into nothing. Brother Matthew tried to resist. He pressed his hands into the stone floor until his knuckles bled, grounding himself in sensation. You are nothing, he whispered fiercely. You mean nothing? The whisper curved around as defiance, gentle as forgiveness. Exactly. He woke the next day, unable to recall his mother's face. This felt like relief. The abbot convened what remained of the brethren in the chapter house, their robes pooling like shadows around their feet. His voice trembled as he spoke, though he tried to steady it with scripture. We have given absence too much reverence, he said. We will fill the void with remembrance. Speak your names. Speak them aloud. One by one, the monks obeyed. Their names sounded strange in the air, brittle, as if unused. When Brother Matthew's turn came, his mouth opened, and nothing followed. Panic flared, bright and brief, before the whisper soothed it away. Names weigh you down. The abbot stared at him, horror breaking through discipline. You must remember, he pleaded. You must hold on. The whisper rose then, no longer shy, no longer contained. It flowed through the room like ink through water, curling into every pause, every breath. Hold nothing, it murmured. Be light. The monastery began to thin. Books lost their titles. Faces blurred at the edges, then smoothed away entirely. Graves in the courtyard became unmarked earth, then indistinguishable from the path. The bell rang each hour, but fewer and fewer heads turned to hear it. At last, only the abbot remained. He walked the cloisters alone, calling names that no longer belonged to anyone. He scratched symbols into the walls, desperate equations meant to anchor meaning. Each time he reached the circle, his hand shook. Leave something, he begged the darkness. Anything. The whisper answered from everywhere and nowhere. Nothing is enough. In the scriptorium, the abbot found a final page untouched. With shaking resolve, he wrote his name upon it, each letter heavy with intent. Beneath it, he drew the circle. 0. Then, slowly, deliberately, he subtracted. When dawn came, the monastery stood empty, preserved like an abandoned thought. Snow covered the paths. Candles guttered out at last. On the final page, the name was gone, leaving only the circle, perfect, complete, and softly whispering. And somewhere far beyond the mountains, a child learning to count paused at the sound of nothing speaking, and forgot what came next. Chapter 4, the prime that would not be touched. The number revealed itself only when the mind reached for it and recoiled. It was first spoken of in the low annex of the Collegium Arcanum, a room reserved for proofs that had failed politely and been forgotten. Dust lay thick as snowfall there, disturbed only by scholars who believed stubbornness a virtue. They whispered of a prime that behaved like no other, indivisible, yes, but not merely resistant to division, resentful of it, a number that permitted recognition but forbade contact, as if awareness itself were the final mercy it allowed. No one could write it. Those who tried found their chalk snapping mid-stroke, their ink bleeding into formless stains. Pens slipped from fingers numbed without warning. The symbol refused containment, sliding out of alignment, breaking margins, escaping sequence. Attempts to render precisely resulted in something else entirely, an adjacent value, a near miss, a lie. "It's there," said Magister Orell, his eyes unfocused as he stared at a slate wiped clean for the 7th time. "I can see it, but the moment I fix it, the room tilts." Others confirmed the sensation, a lurch behind the eyes, a momentary dislocation, like missing a stare in the dark. Reality, they said, skipped not forward or back, but sideways. A single beat dropped from the rhythm of existence, then hurriedly concealed. The Collegium banned discussion of the prime by winter. By spring, the ban was irrelevant. The number surfaced elsewhere, carried in half-dreams and unfinished equations. Shepherds traced it unknowingly in dirt with their staffs. Children hummed it as a rhythm that never resolved. Bells rang in patterns that suggested it without striking it. Always close, never exact. Brother cartographer Ilsa claimed the prime could be approached geometrically, if not named. He laid vellum across his drafting table and began constructing shapes. Polygons nesting within circles, angles tightening toward inevitability. Each configuration hinted at the prime's presence, a shadow cast by something standing just beyond the lantern's reach. As his lines converged, Ilsa felt a familiar vertigo bloom. "Don't look directly," he warned his apprentice, voice tight. "It notices attention." The apprentice laughed, then stopped abruptly. "Master," she whispered, "why is the room smaller?" The walls had not moved. The ceiling had not lowered. Yet the space felt compressed, as though reality had clenched a fist around them. Ilsa rolled up the vellum with shaking hands and burned it before nightfall. The ashes refused to scatter evenly. Stories spread of those who dared to prove the prime. A mathematician in the eastern cities locked himself away, emerging weeks later with a proof so elegant it brought witnesses to tears, until they realized the final line was missing, not erased, not torn away, simply absent, as if it had never been conceived. The mathematician could not explain the omission. He could not explain anything. He spent his remaining years tracing circles in dust and flinching whenever someone tried to count aloud. Another, more arrogant, attempted to define the prime through exclusion, carving away every possible divisor until only the forbidden core remained. On the night of completion, neighbors heard a sound like glass bending. In the morning, his study was intact, his work meticulous. Yet the man himself could not be found. His shoes stood neatly by the desk, toes pointed toward nothing. "It doesn't allow completion," murmured the elders. "Completion is a kind of touch." In the mountain abbeys, monks took the warning further. They believed the prime was not merely untouchable, but protective, a seal set upon a deeper truth. To breach it was to invite what lay beyond enumeration. During vigils, they spoke of it only in negation. It is not even. It is not composite. It is not alone. Their voices dropped lower with each denial, as if subtraction itself were dangerous. Candles guttered when the prime was nearly named. Once, during a snowfall so thick it erased the horizon, a monk whispered, "It is indivisible because it guards division." The abbot struck him hard across the mouth. "Silence," he hissed. "You'll fracture us." Those who felt the prime's pull described the pressure at the crown of the skull, the sensation of being measured by something that did not care for answers. They dreamed of standing before a door with no handle, knowing with terrible certainty that opening it was possible, but not permitted. One night, the Collegium's bell rang without a hand to move it. Scholars gathered in the central hall, drawn by dread and curiosity in equal measure. At the center of the floor, chalk markings had appeared on their own, faint but deliberate, not the prime itself, but its outline, the space it would occupy if it allowed such a thing. No one stepped closer. "It's an invitation," said someone. "No," replied another. It's a warning. Magister O'Rell knelt at the edge of the markings, sweat beating at his temples. I think, he said slowly, that the prime is not indivisible because it cannot be broken. It is indivisible because it is already broken and does not wish to be made whole. A low sound rippled through the hall, not quite a voice, not quite a number. The chalk lines trembled, then steadied as if reassured. From that night on, counting became unreliable. Totals differed depending on who spoke them. Steps between floors increased or decreased by one. Ledgers disagreed with themselves. The world seemed to hesitate at certain sums, pausing before continuing, as though checking a rule it did not fully remember. Children were warned never to count past certain points. Skip it, their parents said, hands tied around small wrists. Some numbers don't want company. In a sealed wing of the Collegium, behind doors never opened twice the same way, the chalk outline remains. It has not grown. It has not faded. It waits with the patience of a locked jaw. Sometimes, when halls are empty and the lamps burn low, scholars swear they feel the floor dip ever so slightly, as if reality itself were leaning away from something it refuses to acknowledge. And somewhere within that careful avoidance, the prime endures, unseen, untouched, indivisible, not because it cannot be grasped, but because the grasp would split the world along a seam never meant to open. Chapter 5, The Infinite Staircase. The first man to dream of the staircase woke with stone dust in his mouth and the certainty that he had been climbing for years. He was a junior mathematician, nameless to history, sleeping beneath a slanted roof while rain stitched the night together. In his dream, a theorem unfolded not as symbols but as architecture. A stairway rising through darkness, each step cut with impossible care, each height identical to the last. There was no railing, no wall, only ascent, pressing upward into a void that breathed like a vast lung. He climbed because there was nowhere else to be. When he woke, his joints ached as if weathered by time. His beard, once neat, had gone white at the edges. He could not remember the descent, only the endless lifting of his feet and the sound, stone upon stone upon stone, counting him forward. By noon, the dream had spread. Others confessed to it in low voices, embarrassed by the intimacy of shared imagination. They described the same steps, the same chill air, the same terrible calm that settled once climbing began. Each insisted the staircase was not metaphor, not vision, but location. It exists, said Professor Lorne, rubbing his temples as though trying to press the thought back inside. Not as concept, as place. I was there. A theorem circulated soon after, scratched onto vellum with shaking hands. It proposed infinity not as an abstraction, but as a destination reachable, measurable, and cruelly consistent. Each step was finite. The sequence was not. The proof was elegant in its simplicity, horrifying in its implication. If infinity was a place, then someone could stand within it. The staircase appeared first in dreams, then in waking reveries. Scholars paused mid-sentence, eyes unfocusing, lips moving silently as if counting steps no one else could see. They described a sensation of upward pull, subtle but insistent, like gravity reversed. Just one more, they whispered. I can almost see the turn. But there was no turn, only ascent. Those who dreamed of the staircase began to age unevenly. Hands spotted, backs curved, voices thinned. Time seemed to catch in their joints, accumulating where it did not belong. A man might enter the dream at 30 and wake with a posture of 70, breath shallow, eyes bright with something close to awe. I reached 1,000 step, one said, smiling weakly. It felt promising. He died before he could say what promise meant. The elders convened and declared the theorem heretical, not against God, but against closure. A place without end threatened the sanctity of arrival, of completion. They ordered the vellum burned, the chalkboard scrubbed clean. But the staircase did not require ink. It had already been built. Some claimed to hear it beneath their feet. A hollow echo in corridors, a vertical resonance that did not belong to flat ground. Others felt in their bones when they climbed ordinary stairs, a dissonance between the step beneath them and the step remembered. Brother Anselm, a monk sent to counsel the afflicted, dreamed of the staircase on his first night among them. He found himself climbing beside others, their faces blurred by exhaustion, robes trailing like shadows. No one spoke. Breath was precious. The air thinned not from altitude, but from duration. How long have we been here? Anselm asked finally. A woman ahead of him laughed. A sound like gravel sliding. Since before the question, she replied. He woke screaming, nails bitten to the quick, legs trembling as though still ascending. By morning, he could no longer walk down steps without gripping the wall, heart racing in panic at the thought of descent. They don't want you to leave, he whispered to the abbot. They want you to keep proving it. The mathematicians argued whether the staircase was created by the theorem or merely revealed by it, whether thought summoned the structure or structure shaped thought. It mattered less each day as more of them failed to wake. Those who did wake sometimes spoke of landmarks, though no one could agree what constituted one. A crack in a step, a stain, a place where the air felt warmer, heavier. I rested once, said Professor Lorne, his voice papery with age. I sat on a step. It allowed it. Allowed? Asked the student. Lorne nodded. That was the worst part. He died that night, folded into himself like a book read too many times. The staircase began to intrude upon waking space. In the great hall, shadows stretched upward instead of outward. In stairwells, people miscounted floors, arriving breathless and confused where no landing should exist. A young woman vanished between the third and fourth floor of the archive. Witnesses swore they heard her footsteps continue long after she should have arrived, fading upward into nothing. They sealed the stairwells. Still, the staircase found them. One evening, during a storm that hammered the city into submission, the door to the observatory opened on its own. Beyond it was not the familiar dome, but the first step, clean, pale, waiting. No one crossed the threshold. They stood together, scholars and monks alike, listening to the staircase hum softly, a sound like countless footsteps remembered at once. It's patient, someone said. It's hungry, said another. It's infinite, whispered a third, reverent and afraid. At dawn, the door was gone. The observatory returned, but the floor sloped subtly upward, just enough to be noticed if one paid attention. Dreams worsened. Those who climbed longest began to forget why they had started. Purpose drained away, leaving only motion, step after step after step, each perfectly measured, each demanding nothing but continuation. In the deepest accounts, those written and then sealed away, there are mentions of a change, a thinning of darkness ahead, a sense not of arrival, but of being observed from above. I think it ends, wrote an unknown hand. I think it pretends not to. The final mathematician to study the theorem locked himself in his tower and ordered the stairs removed entirely. Ladders replaced them. Ropes, anything but steps. He slept sitting up, feet flat on the floor, refusing ascent even in dreams. On the seventh night, the tower grew taller. No one saw it happen. They only noticed in the morning that the windows were higher, the door farther from the ground. Inside, they found the mathematician at the center of the room, standing on nothing, feet worn raw, eyes lifted in quiet terror. Above him, the ceiling receded, and somewhere beyond sight, the sound of footsteps continued, steady, patient, and still climbing. Chapter 6. The ratio that shaped the flesh. Beauty learned to measure itself, and the world paid for the precision. It began in the ateliers along the river, where light fell cleanly through tall windows and dust hung like incense. Artists there spoke of a ratio older than Scripture, a proportion whispered by shells and stars, a harmony that could be trusted when the eye faltered. They traced it in charcoal and gold leaf, inscribing its calm authority into canvases and stone. When followed faithfully, the ratio promised balance, no excess, no want, only the quiet relief of things placed where they belonged. The statues were the first to change. Marble torsos took on a softness that felt unearned, limbs aligned with an exactness that unsettled the hand. Viewers lingered longer than they meant to, breathing shallowly, caught by a sense that the figures were not merely beautiful, but correct. The sculptors smiled at this, mistaking discomfort for reverence. Look, murmured Master Virile, running his fingers along a cheek cut to the ratio's decree. The stone understands. Soon patrons demanded the ratio everywhere, in paintings, in buildings, in the curve of a stair, the width of a doorway. It spread with the authority of fashion, and the confidence of mathematics. Those who resisted were dismissed as jealous or imprecise. Nature herself obeys it, the patron said. Why shouldn't we? The first rumors came from the hospitals. A surgeon reported a patient whose bones had bent during healing, aligning themselves into cleaner lines than the break allowed. Another spoke of a woman whose face had subtly rearranged over weeks of convalescence, eyes shifting closer, jaw narrowing, until she resembled a study drawn too carefully. It's remarkable, the surgeon whispered, unable to keep awe from his voice. She's improved. The woman did not speak. She only stared at her reflection with mounting panic, as if watching a stranger arrive by degrees. In the city, children born that season were measured obsessively. Midwives marked distances between features with calipers and thread. Parents boasted when their infants fell close to the sacred proportion, when their cries seemed to echo pleasingly in symmetrical rooms. She's blessed, they said. He's perfect. Those who did not fit were encouraged to adjust. Artists turned to living models, correcting them gently at first. A chin tilted here, a shoulder drawn back. Hours spent holding poses that encouraged the body to remember a better shape. The ratio was traced on the skin in faint chalk lines, then ink, then scars where the body resisted. Hold still, crooned the sculptor, voice thick with devotion. You'll thank me. Some models felt it working from the inside, a pressure beneath the skin, a tug along tendons, coaxing them into alignment. Pain came late, if at all. The ratio was merciful in that way. It rewarded compliance with ease. Those who tried to flee found their movements awkward, unbalanced, as if their own limbs disagreed with them. Doorways narrowed, floors slanted. The city itself seemed to favor those who conformed, granting them smooth passage while others stumbled and bruised. A preacher spoke out, standing beneath an arch built to the ratio's demand. His voice echoed too perfectly, robbing his words of warmth. Perfection is not neutral, he cried. It has teeth. That night, his spine curved in his sleep, vertebrae shifting like beads on a string. By morning, he could no longer stand without pain. His congregation admired the new elegance of his posture and asked him to speak again. In the ateliers, mirrors multiplied. Artists insisted upon them, claiming they revealed errors the eye forgave too easily. People began to study themselves with unnatural focus, tracing lines from brow to chin, shoulder to hip. They adjusted their smiles, their stance, their breathing. Too wide, someone would murmur. Too long, said another. Almost right, came the cruelest judgment. Bones answered these appraisals in time. Joints tightened, cartilage thinned. Faces grew still, expressions settling into a calm that read a serenity until one noticed the eyes. Always searching, always measuring. A physician named Aloan kept records in secret, pages hidden beneath floorboards. She sketched bodies as they had been and as they became, her lines shaking as the differences narrowed. They're being edited, she whispered to a colleague who dared to look, as if by an invisible hand. Isn't that what beauty has always done? The colleague replied, though his voice wavered. The ratio entered medicine, officially, then codified into treatments. Splints and braces shaped to its angles. Surgical corrections justified as improvements. Consent forms spoke of optimization and harmony. Patients signed because refusal felt like ugliness. In the poorest quarter, where mirrors were scarce, people fared better at first. But the ratio seeped through architecture and custom. New buildings cast shadows that encouraged alignment. Benches forced certain postures. Even the bells rang intervals that suggested correction. Children played a game they called straightening, pushing one another into shapes that felt right. Those who cried were told to stop resisting. It's for your own good, they said, already learning the phrase. Aloan tried to leave the city. At the gates, she found them narrowed subtly, the arch compressed into elegance. As she passed beneath, a sudden pain lanced through her ribs. She staggered, gasping, feeling something inside her twist to accommodate the space. She turned back. At night, she dreamed of mannequins walking the streets, their joints clicking softly, faces identical save for the terror trapped beneath their symmetry. In the dream, they smiled at her with mouths measured to perfection. It's almost finished, they whispered. Can't you feel it settling? The masters gathered to unveil their greatest work, a hall built entirely to the ratio, from foundation to finial. When the doors opened, the crowd inhaled as one. The space felt inevitable. Standing within it made the body ache with a desire to match. People entered and did not leave. Those who did emerge walked differently, their movements smooth and economical, their expressions placid. They spoke less. They slept standing, leaning just so against walls that welcomed them. Eloin forced her way into the hall on the third day. Inside, the air thrummed with quiet correction. She saw people press against columns, their bodies adjusting in small, relentless increments. She heard bones whispering to one another, negotiating new terms. At the center stood a statue unfinished, its proportions exact beyond human tolerance. The face was blank, awaiting features. A master approached her, eyes shining. "It's missing only one thing," he said gently. "A model willing to be perfected." She backed away, heart pounding, feeling the ratio tug at her own flesh, inviting, patient. As she fled, she glanced back once and saw the statue's surface ripple, as if eager. Outside, the city bells began to ring in perfect harmony, and somewhere beneath the sound, bodies listened and began to agree. Chapter 7. The Probability of Damnation. The manuscript smelled of smoke, salt, and inevitability, and everyone who touched it lost something they had not known could be wagered. Its surface in the low gambling houses near the docks, passed hand to hand beneath tables slick with ale and sweat. No one admitted to writing it. No one could remember where they had first seen it. The pages were thin as confession slips, the ink precise and merciless, written in a hand that never hesitated. At a glance, it appeared to be a ledger of odds, dice throws, card draws, coin flips. Yet the longer one looked, the clearer it became that the calculations did not stop at the table. Breaths were tallied, heartbeats marked, the probability of standing up without stumbling, the likelihood of waking the next morning, the chance that a name, once spoken, would ever be spoken again. "It's just numbers," scoffed the sailor, fingers trembling as he rolled the dice. "You can make them say anything." He rolled a 6. The manuscript agreed. Those who studied it closely felt a creeping sense of exposure, as though the book were not predicting outcomes but remembering them. Every variable was accounted for, even those no one admitted existed. Guilt, hesitation, the way regret weighted the hand just before throw. A gambler named Rook claimed the manuscript, improve his luck. He followed its margins religiously, adjusting his bets by its subtle corrections. When others lost, he won. When chance wavered, he stood firm. "It's honest," he whispered, eyes shining. "It doesn't lie like hope does." Soon, the manuscript was consulted before every game. Players leaned close, voices hushed, treating it like an oracle that spoke only in fractions. They argued over interpretations, tracing equations with dirty nails. "What's my chance?" one would ask. Rook would run a finger down the page, lips moving. "Of surviving the night," he murmured. "Still above 0. "Still," the man croaked. Rook smiled thinly. "Be grateful." The losses began quietly. A woman lost her wedding ring in a simple draw, though she had not wagered it. A man bet his last coin and walked away missing a year of memory, unable to recall his own child's face. The manuscript recorded these outcomes without comment, the ink never smudging, never judging. Scholars eventually heard of it. Drawn by rumors of impossible precision, they came expecting trickery, sleight of hand dressed as mathematics. What they found unsettled them. The equations accounted for variables no model allowed: moral weight, intent, the slow erosion of certainty. When challenged, the numbers did not change. They simply revealed how little had been understood. "It's calculating fate," whispered one academic, pale and sweating. "No, worse. It's calculating liability." The manuscript traveled, as such things do, slipping from dockside to drawing room, from tavern to study. Everywhere it went, the same pattern emerged. People stopped praying. They stopped hoping. They began checking. Before leaving the house, before crossing a street, before saying, "I love you." "What are the odds?" they asked the book, and the book answered. Always cold, always exact, always with a remainder. A priest attempted to burn it. The fire curled around the pages, obedient, respectful, refusing to consume them. The priest fell to his knees, staring at a new line that had appeared in the margin. Probability of absolution diminishing at night. Those who had consulted the manuscript dreamed of endless tables, each marked with numbers instead of names. They saw themselves seated again and again, making the same choices with slight variations, losing different pieces each time. How many times? One dreamer begged, clutching his chest. The dealer, faceless, patient, did not answer. He only turned another page. The most terrible discovery came when someone tried to find the final sum. A mathematician named Selk locked himself away, determined to trace the calculations to their terminus. He believed that if damnation had a probability, it must also have a threshold, a point at which the odds resolved. For days, he worked in silence, eating little, sleeping less. His notes grew frantic, his margins crowded with revisions. The closer he came, the quieter the room felt, as though sound itself were being subtracted. When at last he reached the final page, his hand froze. The probability was there, written plainly. Not zero. Never zero. Selk laughed then, a raw, broken sound. So it's always possible, he whispered, no matter how careful. The manuscript did not respond. They found him later, seated upright, eyes open, heart stopped mid-beat. On his desk lay the book, open to a new calculation. Probability of resistance, negligible. From that point on, the manuscript no longer needed to be consulted. People felt the odds settling around them like weather. They sensed when a choice leaned toward loss, when a word carried too much risk. Some tried to live cautiously, trimming their lives down to safer margins. It did not help. Others leaned into the numbers, gambling recklessly, believing that acknowledgement granted favor. It did not. In the end, the manuscript made its way to a cathedral library, shelved between volumes on sin and redemption. There, it sat quietly, pages turning on their own when no one watched. Monks reported hearing it whisper during prayers. Still above zero, it seemed to say, still counting. One winter evening, the bells rang without reason, and a clerk noticed a new entry forming on the final page, not in ink, but in shadow. A calculation large enough to require the whole margin. The probability was unchanged, but the variables had expanded. Outside, the city breathed, unaware that it had just been included in the wager. Chapter 8. The formula that predicted the fire. The chalkboard arrived before dawn, standing where nothing had stood the night before, and the city did not yet know it had already been solved. It rose from the cobblestones of the central square like a headstone dragged up from beneath the earth. Black slate, wooden frame scorched at the edges, its surface unmarred by dust or rain. No signature marked it, no handprint, only a single equation written in a calm, deliberate script, each symbol spaced with reverent precision. Those who passed in the early hours slowed, without knowing why. Bakers paused with flour still on their sleeves. Guards lingered at their posts, eyes narrowing, brows knitting, as if the board were speaking in a language remembered rather than learned. The numbers were simple enough. Temperature gradients, wind vectors, time intervals. Anyone with schooling could read them. No one could explain why their stomachs tightened as they did. It's a forecast, someone said, trying to laugh. No, replied another. It's a confession. By mid-morning, a crowd had gathered. Scholars arrived first, drawn by rumor sharpened into dread. They traced the equation with gloved fingers, careful not to smudge the chalk. It's complete, murmured a physicist, voice hollow. There's nothing to add. Then what does it solve? Asked a councilman. The physicist swallowed. It solves us. The formula did not predict rain or harvest or the turning of stars. It described combustion with intimate familiarity, the way heat would travel through stone, the manner in which wind would curl through alleys like a hand seeking purchase, the precise moment when flame would outrun prayer. Most unsettling of all was the time. Not a range, not an estimate. A moment, 3 days hence, just after dusk. The city council ordered the board removed. The men sent to do it returned pale, hands shaking. It won't move, one whispered. It's heavier than it looks. Rope snapped. Levers slipped. The board remained upright, its legs sinking imperceptibly into the stone as if rooting itself deeper with every attempt. When a mason raised his hammer in frustration, the chalk line beneath his hand darkened, thickening like fresh bone. He dropped the tool and fled. Arguments followed. Some called it a hoax, others a threat. A few fell to their knees, convinced it was a warning sent by God or devil or something colder than either. A woman pressed forward, eyes bright with fear. "My house," she said. "Does it say my house?" No one answered. That night, the board was guarded. Torches burned low around it, casting shadows that bent away from the equation, refusing to cross its surface. Guards spoke in murmurs, their voices slipping into superstition despite themselves. "Erase it," one suggested. "We tried," said another. "The chalk comes back." Indeed it did. Washed away, scraped clean, even chipped from the slate. By morning, the symbols returned, exact and patient, as though offended by the delay. On the second day, people began to leave. Carts clogged the roads. Families packed what they could carry, glancing back over their shoulders as if expecting the city to move in their absence. Others stayed, convinced that flight would only hasten what was already calculated. "If it's written," said a shopkeeper, barring his door, "then running is just another variable." The scholars retreated to their studies, desperate to find error. They redid the calculations with shaking hands, substituted assumptions, altered constants. Each attempt circled back to the same solution, the same quiet certainty. "There's no agency in it," whispered a young mathematician. "No malice, just outcome." "That's worse," replied her mentor. "Malice can be bargained with." As dusk fell on the third day, the square emptied. The chalkboard stood alone, lantern light pooling at its base. The equation glowed faintly now, not with magic, but with inevitability, the way ice shines just before it breaks. A bell rang. Once. Wind shifted. Those still within the city felt it before they saw it. A tightening of air, a dryness in the throat, a subtle leaning of the world toward ignition. Somewhere, a candle flame stretched too tall. The first fire began exactly where the equation said it would. Not dramatic, not immediate. A kitchen hearth flared, with catching faster than expected. A gust carried sparks to a nearby awning. Cloth went up like breath. Then the city remembered all at once that it was made of fuel. Flames raced through streets with practiced confidence, turning corners as if guided. Roofs collapsed in sequence. Towers burned from the inside out. People screamed numbers without knowing why. Count of children, steps, exits, as smoke unstitched their thoughts. And through it all, the chalkboard remained. Fire washed around it, heat blistering stone, melting bells, fusing iron to bone. The board did not scorch. The chalk did not smear. Soot parted politely at its edges, leaving the equation legible amid ruin. A man stumbled into the square, hair ablaze, eyes wild. He collapsed before the board, clawing at the slate. "You knew," he sobbed. "You knew, and you didn't stop it." The equation did not change. As the city burned itself hollow, a final line appeared beneath the solution. Thin, almost tender, variables satisfied. When dawn came, smoke lay heavy over blackened streets. The fire had consumed exactly what the formula described. No more, no less. Entire blocks gone, others untouched by a margin so precise it inspired nausea. The chalkboard still stood. Scholars who returned found the equation intact, but altered. New numbers had begun to form at the bottom, faint as breath on glass. Not for fire, for something else. Far away, clouds gathered where no rain was forecast, and the wind began, slowly, to learn a different direction. Chapter 9. The Proof Written in Blood. The proof did not begin on paper, but on skin. It was spoken of only after doors were locked and lamps turned low, when certainty grew brittle and curiosity sharpened into something dangerous. Scholars call it apocryphal. Priests called it blasphemy. Those who had seen even the first step called it mercifully incomplete, for the proof required no symbols, no numbers, no ink, only the body and a willingness to spend it. They said the first line was always easy. A cut across the palm, shallow enough to justify, deep enough to remember. Blood welled, warm and bright, and the mind sharpened as if rewarded for the offering. Patterns emerged immediately. Connections long suspected snapped into focus. The world felt briefly legible, like a sentence finally finished. "I see it," whispered a young scholar, staring at his bleeding hand. "It's obvious now." They always said that. The proof passed not by manuscript, but by ritual. Each step taught in murmured instructions from one ruined mind to another. No two versions were identical. Yet all followed the same terrible structure. A premise acknowledged, a sacrifice made, a conclusion revealed, and then another premise appeared, waiting. The room where the proof was most often attempted lay beneath an abandoned infirmary, its stones dark with old damp and older stains. Candles burned there without smoke. The air pressed close, as if eager to witness. Those who entered felt an immediate sense of attention, like a throat clearing in the dark. "Do not rush," cautioned an elder who no longer slept. "Pain is punctuation. Misplace it, and the meaning breaks." The second line demanded more. A slice along the forearm, slow and deliberate, tracing a path that mirrored a logical progression only the initiate could see. Blood fell to the floor in careful drops, spacing themselves as if obeying an unseen margin. With each drop, understanding deepened. Not knowledge, context. The relationships between things unfolded with terrifying grace. Time revealed its scaffolding. Chance shed its disguise. Cause and effect braided together until they felt inevitable. "It explains suffering," gasped one woman, teeth clenched as she bound her arm. "Not why it happens. Why it's necessary." Those who reached the third line did not scream. By then, pain had become language. A wound to the thigh, the shoulder, the ribs. Each cut a line with realization so vast it eclipsed the injury that purchased it. They saw how wars balanced like equations, how love functioned as a variable, how mercy introduced instability into otherwise perfect systems. Some laughed, some wept, some fell silent, overwhelmed by the elegance of it all. The proof did not hurry them. It waited. Between lines, initiates rested on the stone floor, breath shallow, eyes unfocused. They spoke in whispers, afraid that louder voices might fracture the clarity settling over them. "It's beautiful," one murmured. "It's unbearable," said another. "It's complete," said a third, just before beginning again. The fourth line was where most failed. It required a sacrifice that could not be bandaged, a removal rather than a cut. Flesh parted with ritual care, not hacked but edited. Those who attempted it learned quickly that hesitation ruined the result. The proof punished imprecision. One man tried to stop midway. The understanding fled instantly, leaving him screaming not from pain, but from sudden ignorance, an abyss opening where certainty had been. He died begging for the return of what he had almost known. "Finish," the others whispered, though he could not hear them. "You have to finish." Those who completed the fourth line spoke less afterward. Their eyes tracked movements no one else made. They flinched at coincidences, having seen the machinery behind them. "It accounts for everything," said a scholar whose voice trembled with awe. "Every outcome, every cruelty, even us." "And forgiveness?" asked the trembling acolyte. The scholar looked away. "That's an error term." The final line was never described in advance. Those who reached it understood why. It could not be anticipated, only recognized when the moment arrived. The proof itself signaled readiness, a pressure behind the sternum, a narrowing of the world until only one conclusion remained possible. Completion demanded a sacrifice that could not be survived. Not death, precisely. Something worse. Identity. Those who finished the proof did not collapse immediately. For a moment, sometimes minutes, they stood radiant with comprehension. They saw the totality of things. Beginnings looping into endings, endings feeding beginnings, the closed elegance of existence without hope or exception. "It's perfect," breathed a woman, blood soaking her robes. "There's no waste." Then the begging began. "Take it back," they sobbed, clawing at the stone. "Please, I don't want to know any more." They pleaded not for life, but for forgetting, for the blunt mercy of ignorance. Some tried to mutilate themselves further. hoping pain might disrupt the clarity. It did not. The proof had already been paid for. Their bodies lived on, sometimes for days, but their minds were emptied of wonder, of fear, of any illusion that might soften the truth. They stared at the world with the dull calm of solved problems. Eventually, their hearts stopped, not from injury, but from conclusion. The room beneath the infirmary was sealed after the third such completion. Stone laid upon stone, warnings carved deep. Yet the proof did not require space. It required only someone willing to ask the wrong question with enough conviction. Fragments of the ritual spread. A cut here, a revelation there. Doctors noticed patients describing moments of unbearable clarity following trauma. Soldiers spoke of seeing the shape of history in their wounds. Saints bled and preached doctrines that felt too neat, too final. Truth costs, whispered the faithful, though none agreed on the price. On the final recorded attempt, a monk named Severin performed the proof alone. He left no instructions, no warnings, only a single line scratched into the wall outside the sealed chamber. Understanding is not meant to be survived. Inside, the candles burned down without flicker. The stone floor drank deeply. When the door was forced open days later, they found no body, only blood arranged in precise, deliberate paths, forming something like an argument. At the center lay a final mark, pressed not in blood but absence, as if something had been cleanly removed from the world. Those who looked upon it felt a terrible pressure behind their eyes, the sensation of a conclusion trying to form. They turned away quickly. But long after, in quiet moments, they would feel a phantom pain, a missing piece of themselves aching to be spent. And somewhere in the dark, the proof waited unfinished, patient for the next willing body to complete the last line. Chapter 10, the final sum. The first thing the sum takes from you is the comfort of thinking you are not already included. It arrives quietly, not as revelation but as recognition, like seeing your own reflection move a heartbeat before you do. No chalkboard bears it. No manuscript survives it. The final sum is not written because it is already tallied, woven into breath and pulse, and the small arithmetic of days passing unnoticed. Those who sense it begin counting without knowing why. At first, it is harmless. Footsteps on stone, the drip of water in a sink, the number of times the heart insists on continuing. The mind reassures itself that this is habit, superstition, the nervous tick of a world that has learned too much. But the numbers persist, lining up patiently, waiting to be added. In monasteries where bells are cracked from overuse, monks whisper a presence that stood behind them during prayers. It's not watching, one confessed, voice shaking in the candlelight. It's adding. The final sum was said to have no variables, no unknowns. Everything had already been accounted for. Every choice, every hesitation, every sin excused, and every mercy withheld. The terror lay not in judgment, but in completion. You can feel when you're almost done, murmured an old abacus maker who refused to sleep indoors. The air gets thinner, like the world is running out of room for you. The scholars who chase it fail quickly. Proofs collapsed. Calculations dissolved into tautologies. The sum could not be derived because derivation implied distance, and the final sum allowed none. It did not sit at the end of work. It sat at the end of being. They said the first person to glimpse it laughed. She had been a teacher, patient and precise, known for her gentle corrections and tidy columns of numbers. One evening, while tallying attendance, she paused, pen hovering. "Oh," she said softly, "that's me?" Her laughter rang bright and brief, like a dropped coin. Then she began counting aloud, students, desks, windows, breaths, her voice accelerating as if afraid the numbers might escape. When she reached the final count, she stopped mid-word and simply ceased, as though a ledger had been closed. No wound marked her, no struggle, only a look of faint surprise, as if she had forgotten one small thing and realized it too late. After that, people listened more closely to silence. The final sum did not announce itself with catastrophe. It manifested in order, in patterns too neat to dismiss. A man noticed his days dividing evenly. A woman found her memories arranging themselves into neat sequences, each ending cleanly without fray. "I don't dream any more," whispered a child to his mother. "I just review." Those afflicted began to see numbers behind faces, totals hovering where names should be, relationships reduced to balances long overdue. "Do you know what you owe?" a dying man asked his son, gripping his sleeve with sudden strength. "Not money. Wait." The counting grew louder at night. Walls ticked. Floors creaked in rhythm. The body itself became a metronome, measuring out its remaining allowances. Some tried to disrupt it. Drinking, fasting, prayer, pain. But the final sum absorbed all deviations. Every act was merely another addend. A cult formed briefly, calling themselves the Enumerated. They believed the sum could be hastened. That awareness might grant control. "We can choose when to finish," they whispered in candlelit rooms. "We can close the account ourselves." They were wrong. Those who attempted to rush the sum found it resistant to impatience. Their counting stretched, numbers repeating, looping back on themselves like a mocking refrain. One woman screamed as her tally reset mid-breath, her life refusing to conclude until every unnoticed moment had been properly counted. "It wants everything," she sobbed. "Even the seconds I wasn't paying attention." The final sum did not care for intention, only inclusion. In the end, it was not the counting that broke people, but the realization of what the sum equaled. Not zero, not infinity. You, not the idea of you or the story you told yourself, but the precise accumulation of your presence in the world. Every impact, however small. Every absence where something else might have been. The sum was not moral. It was exact. "I thought I mattered more," whispered a philosopher as the numbers settled around him like falling ash. "I thought I mattered less," said another, with equal horror. Those nearing completion described a sensation like standing at the edge of a ledger, so vast it curved away from sight. On one side, everything they had been. On the other, nothing left to add. "Is there an after?" asked a trembling voice in the dark. "There is only final," came the answer, not spoken but resolved. The last known record of the final sum appeared as a child's drawing, found pinned to a door with no house behind it. Rows of marks filled the page, neat and careful. At the bottom, a single line remained empty. Beneath it, in uncertain handwriting, were the words, "I'm almost done." No one claimed the drawing. No one remembered the child. Now, even as this is read, something subtle shifts. A pause stretches a little too long. A breath lands heavier than expected. A thought completes itself with unwelcome precision. The counting has already begun. You feel it when you notice you are still counting. You hear it when silence seems to wait for your number. You understand it when you realize the sum does not end somewhere else. It ends exactly where you're standing. And when the final number clicks into place, when nothing remains to be added, you will not fall or burn or vanish. You will simply be totaled. Somewhere nearby, something turns a page and the counting starts again.